everybody, and welcome and thank you for joining the Beyond Infrastructure Rethinking Dignity, Identity in Sanitation Work webinar. I'll be sharing, first of all, some logistical details. First of all, this session is being recorded and the recording will be shared afterwards. All participants will remain on mute until the Q&A segment. Please share your reflections, comments, or questions in the chat section, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So, sanitation workers are essential to public health, yet their contributions often go unseen and undervalued. While infrastructure has advanced, the human experience of sanitation work, including dignity, identity, and motivation, remains overlooked. This webinar explores how behavioural insights, participatory research, policy reforms, and on-the-ground practice can shift the sanitation sector towards stronger recognition, protection, and support for workers who keep communities healthy. This webinar is brought to you by Unilever through the Transform programme, which is a joint initiative with the UK government, FCDO, and EY, which supports researchers and entrepreneurs across Africa and Asia. And this webinar is about the Sanitation Workers Project implemented by Basara. To learn more about the project, please use the link in the chat to find the groundwork piece of work. So, the flow of this webinar will be a roundtable discussion on two themes, followed by a question and answer session. I encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the chat as we continue, and we will address them at the end. And I'd like to first of all introduce you to our expert panel. So we're fortunate enough to have Dr. Chrissy Brown from the Workers' Health. She's the Workers' Health Coordinator at WAGO, which stands for Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. And we will learn from Dr. Chrissy's experience on worker-led organizing, health advocacy, and movement building that strengthens dignity, safety, and occupational health for sanitation workers in informal systems. Andres Hego is the Senior Sanitation Policy Analyst at WaterAid, a role that involves both research and advocacy, and we will learn from his global policy work with a focus on India. And then we have Rowan Harity, an Engagement Director at Basara, leading behavioural science and research and advocacy. We will learn from his work on the Transform project in Sub-Saharan Africa. And lastly, but not least, we have Francis Kuria from Fresh Life, a sanitation organisation in Kenya, and we will learn from his first-hand experience working with sanitation workers day to day. Together, the panellists will bring varied perspectives that enrich each other's work. And finally, I am your moderator, Lisa Hawkes. I lead the Transform programme at Unilever, but in this webinar, I'm very happy to be returning to my sanitation roots since I set up the sanitation pillar within Transform and have supported more than 7 sanitation entrepreneurs across Africa and Asia. So with that, I'm going to start with our first theme, which is dignity, identity, and recognition in sanitation work. And the objective is to explore how dignity, social identity, and public recognition shape sanitation workers' experiences, motivations, and well-being. So my first question goes to Dr. Christie. Dr. Christie, what defines dignity in sanitation work today, and what are the most pertinent factors that shape workers' dignity?
Firstly, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, fellow panelists. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm from WeGo, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. And because we are specialists on the informal economy, a lot of what I will say will be sort of shaped around that reality. And that's a reality in which many sanitation workers in the world today are actually informally employed. So they are concentrated within the informal economy in many countries, particularly in the in both the global south and the global north. But the majority of sanitation workers in the informal economy are in the so-called global south. And really, working in the informal economy means working without enforcement of workers' rights, working often without legal recognition of said rights, and also working largely without any social or broader worker protections. And so that really means that many sanitation workers, unfortunately, are forced into situations where they are working in very poor working conditions with with high rates of financial insecurities, low rates of salaries, etc. And this is all despite the fact that sanitation workers, of course, make huge contributions to to public health, to the health of communities, to the health of all of us, as well as you know, very real contributions to GDP. Um, and really, it's this lack of social and worker protections that many sanitation workers have, which raises questions of dignity or indignity. So we see that many sanitation workers are excluded from occupational health and safety frameworks and policies and practices, which leaves them exposed to all the various different health risks that they unfortunately are faced with in by nature of doing sanitation work. You often have workers funding their own forms of protection, so wearing masks, gloves, etc. Workers are paying for that out of their own pocket in many countries around the world. And they also lack access to key services and infrastructure, which would otherwise better protect their health and their well-being. And this is despite them already being themselves an important provider of infrastructure and services to many others. And, just on this topic of dignity, there's also deeper issues here relating to the social stratification of sanitation work, in that much of the sanitation workforce is often shaped by issues of race, ethnicity, and caste. We know that many of the most marginalized groups are actually concentrated within the sanitation workforce, and this is not by accident. Um, and unfortunately, this is where incomes are lowest and where exploitation is the highest. Um, so, yes, there are many issues of dignity and indignity within sanitation work that require very urgent redressal.
Thank you, Dr. Christie. So I'd like now to bring in Rowan. So Rowan, how does social identity affect how sanitation workers are perceived and treated?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think I'll maybe echo what Chrissy's already said, put so eloquently. Yeah, social identity is at the core of who we are as people. It's this foundational element of how we conceive of ourselves and how we relate to other people around us. It drives who we associate with and who we favor and who we disfavor. It helps create this in-group, out-group dynamic. And by that, I mean that there are some that we would consider in our group, some that we would associate with, and there are others that we consider out of our group, those who are outside of our associations, those who we exclude, right? And those in-group, out-group dynamics are really common for us in our research as Busara, and people almost instinctively categorize others into these groups, and it informs how we perceive and treat other people. As Chrissy said, for sanitation work, there is that social stratification. And particularly in LMICs in the Global South, where we've conducted our research, sanitation workers are considered to be members of this outgroup. The social identity of sanitation workers then is shaped by the type of work that they do, which is often invisible and unappreciated, physically demanding, and also considered dirty and low status. And because then it's socially undervalued, the workers inherit that same low status, even though they provide what is an essential public service. And in our findings, we think there are like three broad dynamics here. The first is that social identity shapes the status that we hold in our society. Sanitation work is seen as dirty, it's low status, it's undesirable, and that identity drives stigma, meaning that sanitation workers receive less respect, less empathy, are spoken to and treated poorly, despite providing an essential public service for us all. And even in our research with Transform, we had many sanitation workers share that they're called derogatory terms while they're working, while they're providing that service for a community. So the second thing is also that status and identity shape the cultural norms of who is included and excluded. So cultural norms that separate clean from unclean create this social exclusion, and people might avoid close interaction or treat sanitation workers as others. Now that's an injunctive norm, right? People give clear disapproval about a certain type of person based on their livelihood, and in this case, their role as a sanitation worker. And then thirdly, social identity influences agency, and agency both in the way that we perceive our self-efficacy as well as the agency that other people lend to us. And that all results in these really undignified working conditions. So because sanitation workers are ascribed this lower status, this lower identity, they have less power to influence decisions about their working conditions, and they, and on some level, also feel that they don't have the ability to advocate for themselves. And this results in limited investment in protective equipment, inadequate facilities for their work, and little to no recognition or support from the communities that they're serving. And their identity directly translates into this very unequal treatment, not just in those interactions, but also the way that we consider them from a policy perspective, policy lens. So, yeah, sanitation workers are essential for society, and to keep it well functioning and healthy, we need sanitation workers because they do provide these essential services. But those serious social stigmas associated with being a sanitation worker and that social identity, really undermine the ability of us to provide that kind of support for sanitation workers, and I think maximize the role that they end up playing for us. There are a bunch of things that different agencies do and initiatives and objectives that they have, some of which I think we'll talk about in this webinar. So I'm excited to hear from some other panelists. But one of the most important ones is the formalization of sanitation work, and excited to talk a bit about that later. Thanks, Lisa.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rowan. And you've made my job as a moderator very easy with your last point on policy. So let's bring our policy perspective with Andres. And the question for you is, how does public recognition shape sanitation workers' experience, motivation, and retention? And what does public recognition look like in practice?
Hi, thanks, Lisa, for the question, and I'm very happy to be in this panel too. I think public recognition is really, really important for workers' retention, for workers' like motivation, and it has a direct impact on the quality of service that is being delivered, but also on other elements like safety and security, like the fact that they are publicly recognized also affects their behavior in terms of how they address risks, etc. And there are also less psychological or more direct impacts, like when the work is not recognized, it may happen at night so that it's not seen by others, and that brings whole other set of risks. So yeah, public recognition is really, really important. And I think I like to think of it in different aspects related to this recognition. I use like the 2, 3, 4, like there are 2 groups, 3 sources and 4 levels of recognition. So I think when I'm talking about the 2 groups, it's like I'm asking about who is being recognized. 3 sources is who is recognizing, who is providing that recognition, and then the 4 levels are how much recognition is there, or at what to what extent are they being recognized. So the 2 groups are really the difference between more formalized businesses, which tend to be mechanical or motorized emptiers that have vacuum trucks, and then the more informal emptiers that might be, or workers that might have more rudimentary tools. And it's obviously a spectrum, but I think having those 2 is very important in terms of the public recognition, because we see places where the mechanical empties are recognized, but the manual empties are not recognized. So it's an important difference to keep in mind. And then the 3 sources of recognition, I think, are the public recognition from the authorities. So whether the local government or the relevant authority, whichever it is, recognizes the role of these sanitation workers. Then there's a recognition from the general public, which is very important, because in many contexts there's a lot of stigma attached to this job. So how do the citizens and the customers view or recognize or discriminate these workers? And then the 3rd source is the self-recognition. It's not really public recognition, but I think it's also important how the workers themselves see their job, and whether they have, it's related to that recognition from the public, but whether they see their work as something they should be ashamed of, or they're actually proud of despite the adverse wider recognition. I think that's also an important aspect. And then finally, the levels of recognition. Again, it's a spectrum, but I would identify 4 levels. Like the lowest level is when the work that they are doing and these workers are not being recognized at all, and they are being prosecuted for doing their job. So it's seen as an illegal or unregulated activity. And as I was saying before, they might do it at night or in ways that avoid the public eye to see them doing their job. Then there's a slightly higher level when they are tolerated, so they are still operating in a gray area or in an unregulated manner, but authorities turn a blind eye because they know that there's no alternative to that, and that they actually have a role. So it's like, okay, we just know it's happening, but we turn a blind eye. And there's another level turning into the more positive end of the spectrum, where the existence of the workers is recognized, and they are not prosecuted, and they may be like even taken into account when planning, etc. But there is no real support or no regulation, and it's a very low-paid job. So it's a recognized but neglect kind of level. And then I think when the final level is when they are properly recognized and their role is acknowledged and valued, and there is then opportunities for collaboration, and it's seen as a valid actor to engage with. So I wanted to lay that out, and to say, like, we should really, I mean, what really makes a difference is when there's this higher level of public recognition, and particularly when the authorities recognize them. I think it makes a big difference in the immediate term, but I would argue that the general public, the citizen customer recognition, is also important in the long term, and to address some of that stigma. And there are many examples of when that highest level of recognition happens, and it can happen both at a symbolic and at a policy level. And there are a couple of examples I wanted to briefly highlight to make it a bit more tangible. One is a maybe more symbolic type of recognition that we have seen in Pakistan, in Punjab, where an activist organization called Center for Law and Justice has organized events to honor workers and to bring them together with the authorities and create this platform to honor, recognize, and publicly award these workers. And I know one member from Center of Law and Justice is in the webinar, so maybe later when we're in the Q&A, we can invite him to share a bit more about that. But yeah, another example I think is that I wanted to share is from India, where the government, for instance, one of the first measures they took was to reclassify sanitation work as a skilled labor. And that's like a very powerful recognition symbolically, but also legally, because that means they have they are differently considered in labor law, so they have more protection and better conditions. And then finally, the third one is from Burkina Faso, where there's an organization called Abase that we have worked with, and who has been advocating for the official recognition of non-motorized emptying, so what can be called like semi-mechanized or manual emptying, as an actual profession. And after a lot of work, they have achieved that, and that has opened then the door to being hired by the authorities in a legal manner rather than more informal arrangements, and for vocational training. And it has opened up lots of doors. So yeah, there's some of the examples of recognition, and I can share some links in the chat also, that if people want to learn more about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. That was fantastic. We'd love to have your links in the chat. And I found that 234 framework so helpful in creating a framework out of something that can be quite an abstract concept. So that is something I have learned already, and we're only 90 minutes in. So thank you very, very much for that. And great that we've got some different perspectives, especially from outside of the African continent where Sarah's research has been based. So in the end, when we finish the panel, I think I'd love for everybody to have a chance to comment on what they've heard. So we'll do that at the end. But just to wrap up this first section, which is really about understanding the problem that we're dealing with here, which I think everybody on this call would like to address, and that will be the second section. I'd just like to bring in that more ground-based perspective and hear from Francis. So Francis, based on your field experience, what real-world examples illustrates how dignity and identity can be strengthened for sanitation workers, and what were the key factors that enabled these successes?
All right. Thank you, Lisa. And just to start us off, I think when we first got into this space, what we realized is that everyone loves a clean space. And in this context, a clean toilet. But what we realize is that the recipient, or rather the persons using these pits in this informal settlements, they did not really appreciate the work that was being done by the sanitation work. So we do have on the first product, where we offer a solution to safely manage the pit latrine waste. And in this space, we work with manual pit emptiers. And when we joined their space, they didn't have a place to take their waste, and they used to work at night. So the struggle here was, yes, I'm offering a solution or a service to this person, but they do not even want to see me working. So they would work at night. They would work while they are very high. I think it's just a coping mechanism with the backlash that they were getting from the community. The charges that they were able to charge at that particular moment was quite low, because they also did not appreciate really the value of the work that they were bringing into this space. So our first hope was to try and improve the thinking of the community. Yes, you need a space. Someone needs to do the clean toilet. Someone needs to do. We first tried to bring the community together with the pit emptiers in one sitting, discuss the underlying issues. We realized there were very far solutions too. And one of the things was, how do you empty the pits? So as it is now, it's still manual. There are no mechanization to say. So while doing this work, after the work, the plots were left too dirty. So the landlord or the pit owners were not very happy with they are happy that their plots looking like. So once we established a few things that were the pain point, we were able to now bring this group, the manual pit emptier groups, aside, and we spoke to them on how do you improve the work that you are doing. Yeah. So before we got there, we also tried to formalize them, because we realized as third parties, we could not able to really bring in the improvements that we wanted, but it could come out very clear from them if we put them in groups and then elect leaders, then speak our ideas through the leaders. So after formalization, and just trying to capacity build the leaders of these groups, over time now we are seeing great improvements. One, they're able to work during the day. Yeah, there are no times you find them working at night. We offered them a space where they are now able to bring their pit waste. Initially, they used to take this pit waste into the rivers or some corners in the community. Secondly, we saw an improvement in income. As we speak now, the last 3 years, if you look at their income, we can see a jump of up to 35 to 40%, which is really encouraging, and it shows that now the community is able to appreciate this work and even pay more for this work. So a little bit of reduced illness because we are now able to get funding towards offering them PPEs, basic ideas. How do you clean up after you've done the work? And also on a large scale, we've also seen reduced use of substance. Since you are able to work during the day, no one is quarreling you while you are working. People are, and the community is appreciative of the work that you are doing.
Thank you so much, Francis. And I've really, you've got such a fantastic audio background which is transporting me to where you are. I'm loving the birds and the things in the background. It's very lovely accompaniment to your very well made points. So thank you to you and all of the speakers for your opening thoughts. It seems to me that everybody is in agreement this is essential work. And that we have now a good understanding of these terms, and we should move on to try and discuss things that we can do to address these issues. I would like to remind you, all the participants, to please put any comments, any perspectives in the chat, and questions as well. And thank you. I know we've had one question received, which we'll come to shortly. So I'd like to move us on to so what can we do about it? Designing safer, fairer, and more resilient sanitation systems. So I'd like to invite Andres first. So based on your policy experience, which reforms are most urgently needed to improve sanitation worker safety and well-being?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a very easy question. No, I'm joking. Yeah, no, it's very complicated, and it depends on its context, which is what you would expect to hear from someone whose job is a policy analyst. But I think it's true, but that doesn't mean that we cannot say anything else about that. No, it's complicated. It depends on the context, but that has some implications. And I think the additional dimension that we need to understand is that it's also like a multi-layered issue. So we're talking about things like equipment. We are talking about things like stigma, about market dynamics. So it's really very multi-sector and multi-layered. So I think also taking into account that these workers have been in many contexts subject to stigma, very low pay, marginalization, it's really important to put them at the center of the solution. So the answer to it's complicated and it depends on the context is like, well, the workers themselves are the ones who should, who know how best to change the situation and where to start. They are also the ones who can make change happen in the long term. And they are the ones who need to lead the change. So from my point of view, supporting them to organize themselves and to make their voice heard is really a key strategy and a very good starting point. And in that, from that perspective, when like WorldTrade was part of the initiative for sanitation workers, and we had some external funding, and we launched what we have called the Empowerment Support Fund. And I've seen the link has also been shared in the chat box. But the idea was like, okay, if we think that that's the solution, let's try to put it in practice. So we were supporting some sanitation workers groups or some activist organizations that were at the grassroots working with these workers on issues of dignity, recognition, rights, health, safety, and let them lead. So it was a really great experience in terms of supporting and letting them take the initiative and be like a company in solidarity rather than have like a project where we come up with the objectives and see if they work in their context. And we learned a lot also in terms of how things change and the need to stay flexible. And I think it was a very interesting experience, which unfortunately we haven't been able to continue after a few years due to lack of funding. But we also recognize that it is not easy to have this flexible funding and be able to do something like what we did. So I'm also supportive of starting for wherever you can. So if you are trying to address this issue and you cannot start like an empowerment support fund, then see where you can start, where is an opportunity, and get going. But what is really important is don't stop there. Don't think that your one-dimensional short-term intervention is enough, because we see a lot of it's very typical to enter this from a protective equipment entry point, or let's develop some guidance for health and safety. And we know that these are not enough. Like maybe the protective equipment is used if it's good enough, but then it's not replaced after some time, or the guidelines, they look very nice on paper, but they are not enforced. So as we said, it is complicated. So you need the PPE, the guidance, the enforcement mechanism, the empowerment of the workers, you need all of that. So it's fine if you take one of those and as entry points or as a low-hanging fruit or hook, but there needs to be this acknowledgement that this is a multifaceted challenge, needs a multifaceted and long-term response. So if you can enter through the empowerment of the workers, that's great. If not, other entry points are also valid, but it's that commitment, long-term commitment, and that acknowledgement that I think is really important. And as I said, engaging with the workers. And I think the economic dimension of this work is quite often not sufficiently addressed. Like I remember, for instance, when during the pandemic we did a study to see how the workers were dealing with it, and one of the workers was asked like, "Oh, why are you working despite the pandemic? How do you feel about it? Are you not using like face masks and things like that?" And the answer was like, "Hunger is more dangerous than COVID. Like it's not like if we don't have enough to feed our families, we like thinking that we might or might not catch a virus is not a big enough risk, because the risk is not being able to feed our family. And if I'm getting offers to go into a drain, which is quite dangerous, I know it's quite dangerous, but I need to do it because otherwise I'm not bringing the income home." So understanding that economic dynamics and the incentives and the structures are, I think, quite important. And I go back to that example from Orissa in India, the Garima scheme, that I said that they had recognized the workers as skilled labor, and that brought these changes in recognition. But it also came after with increased pay, increased employment security, etc. So I think it's a good example of this multifaceted response that includes the economic dimensions of the work. So yeah, I would highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. I actually have a question. I'm going to put that in the chat because I want to prioritize the audience questions, as I can always follow up with you. But I'd like to bring in the behavioral perspective that you touched on, and invite Rowan to speak next. And I'd like to learn, Rowan, about your work in sub-Saharan Africa. Which behavioral interventions show the most promise for improving sanitation worker dignity, identity, and motivation?
Yeah, thank you. I think from our perspective, these are features that happen across a system, and behavioral interventions are useful when done in conjunction with other sorts of more structural investments that address more systematic issues. And if that can build momentum over a series of interventions or intervention areas across different parts of a system, then that's particularly impactful and useful. I'll also say that the evidence base on the effectiveness of behavioral interventions is relatively limited. Our work with you guys, Transform, is one of only a handful of studies that I know of that tried to capture dynamics of sanitation worker dignity and identity. So there's certainly need for more research, more thoughtful investigation, more analyses of what is working and what isn't. But because we have done this work together, and with you and with a few other partners, we do have some high-level clusters of different ideas, intervention areas that we think are particularly impactful or should receive more attention by implementers moving forward and policymakers. And those are driven by, from our perspective, two drivers of dignity and motivation for sanitation workers, and that's pride in their work. And that's often driven by the sense of familial responsibilities and a strong sense of purpose to the people in their lives. And then the second driver is this social support element. So support from peers, supervisors, or even consumers, which provides this sort of psychological resilience and reinforces a sense of belonging, and thus promotes dignity, identity, motivation. So our research did a series of qualitative exercises and use those insights to inform a human-centered design process where we designed interventions with sanitation workers and with some of the partners working to support them. And the output of that process was around 12 interventions, so just over 10. And those were clustered around 4 themes. And I think these themes are the ones that people need to be keeping in mind when trying to think about how to promote dignity and motivation for sanitation workers, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, which is where this research is from. But I think that there are lessons here for the global South more generally. First, we have interventions that are aimed at increasing empathy for sanitation workers, and in doing so, also improve visibility of sanitation workers. And so here we have some intervention sets that reduce stigma by increasing visibility and recognition. And we can do things like storytelling or public acknowledgement. Some good examples have been given already. And these other kind of community-facing campaigns. And these are strengthening the relationship, building empathy between communities and their sanitation workers. And then the feelings of pride that sanitation workers can have about their own work, the feeling of pride in place. Then we have interventions that build and strengthen relationships between sanitation workers themselves. And here our intervention sets have focused on peer networks and safety practices, forming some associations, and having some opportunities for sanitation workers to exchange together. Now, these sorts of interventions build association, camaraderie, pride, and a sense of community. And there's some example that we've seen, a supportive network for sanitation workers, which had some structured mentorship, provided more supportive supervision, gave people a sense of purpose and progress, and people that cared about the work they were doing, and also a bit of pride and confidence that they were doing something that was important and that was trusted by the communities that they were working for. Thirdly, we have the professionalization of sanitation workers, and I think this has also been covered quite well by the other panelists. But training, accreditation, certification, these sorts of things, they can be quite a light lift, but they do have impact on the way that sanitation workers perceive themselves and feel motivated and dignified in doing their work. But these also include some questions on how we integrate into more formal policy cycles. How do we get governments to take accountability for the professionalization of sanitation workers? How do we support the civil society actors who want to organize sanitation workers? And how do we elevate voices of sanitation workers as they lobby for their own professionalism? Professionalization rather. And then finally, we have these interventions that are focused on community engagement. These are just meant to bridge the gap between sanitation workers and communities they work in. And there's obviously some overlap between each of these, four themes. Yeah, so these different interventions target morale boosting work and support improved identity, as well as some interpersonal and intercommunal dynamics that we think support dignity and respect to sanitation workers. And these, as I said at the beginning, are made much more useful when they're integrated with broader policy interventions, economic interventions, these sorts of things that can magnify behavioral work. And I think as a behavioral scientist, we're often not sure how our interventions operate in the broader system. So we might roll out an intervention and we can measure these sort of marginal changes or sometimes significant changes in people's self-efficacy or feelings of confidence, these sorts of things. But it's important for us. I think people can see this panel is quite multidisciplinary, but it's important for us to have these multidisciplinary relationships, to have these convenings where we can learn from each other and link, these behavioral interventions, this behavioral research that we're doing, it is related to and fundamental to the broader policy initiatives or the economic programming that people are also rolling out to support sanitation workers. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd like to now bring in Dr. Chrissy about something else that Andres touched on, which was about support to organize, which I'm sure coming from the organization she does is something very dear to her heart. So I would like to know, what does it take to embed sanitation workers' perspectives into the design and delivery of sanitation systems and to uphold their dignity?
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks to all the other panelists for their very thought-provoking interventions. And really, I think something that brings together some of the sort of more behavioral intervention side into the sort of broader structural political sort of issues, like the thing that kind of connects that is also this idea of self-recognition, which I'm glad was raised earlier, where sanitation workers are able, even just on an individual level, to recognize that I am a worker. I am a worker too, even if whatever's written in a country's policy does not necessarily designate them as being someone who is apparently worthy of basic workers' rights. If we have sanitation workers themselves recognize that I am actually a worker too, and therefore I am deserving of rights and basic dignity and a decent livelihood and health and well-being and all of those things, that's sort of the starting point for workers to organize themselves and build this sort of collective among themselves where they say, well, we are all sanitation workers in whichever city, whichever municipality, whichever country. We are massive contributors in this way. We collectively have these rights, which are not being recognized, which are not being upheld, but we also collectively have power to actually do something about it. So really, it's about this bottom up change. It's not top down, it's bottom up. It's where we're talking about some of the most marginalized people within our communities who organize themselves within associations, unions, cooperatives, and various other sort of worker units. And really the best way to foster that level of organizing and mobilizing, whether it's at local, national, or international level, is really to resource them, make sure that they are well resourced, fund them, help them to strengthen their organizations, support them with capacity building. That could be capacity building around um, how within your own sort of worker unit, how can you identify potential risks to your health and safety? What can we do within our own um, powers to prevent someone from getting injured or sick in our workplace as sanitation workers. So supporting that capacity building and sort of upskilling. Um, but there's also political education as well, and that's really, really important because this is a political issue. Sanitation work is political, health is political, safety is political, dignity is political. So we need workers within, while they're organizing themselves, to also um, recognize that there are political levers here that they have all of the power to move, um, and also recognize the various different sort of political and economic factors um, that are shaping their realities. That is all very, very important. And I also think connecting these various different worker organizations with each other, so building networks of sanitation worker organizations is so important. That's why, the work of um, WaterAid and WeGo and various other international entities who are actually helping, who are actually bringing workers together across different geographies so that they can exchange on their various experiences in their own country contexts is really, really helpful. It's a fantastic way of um, supporting workers, supporting sanitation workers to make advancements within their own contexts. Um, I would also say that beyond just supporting workers to organize themselves and organize other workers in their neighborhoods, it's also about increasing participation in research. So, of course, we've heard a little bit today about some of the ongoing studies that are happening. And really, it's about challenging this invisibility within the data. Sanitation workers and other workers in the informal economy are quite frankly shut out from many of the sort of um, from public discourse, from a lot of the sort of narratives within research. We're not hearing a huge amount about workers' realities from the voices of workers. And so we really need this equitable participation where these sanitation workers and their organizations are really, are a fundamental part of a research project from beginning to end. So every stage of the research, from inception to data collection to analysis and etc. That workers are really um, are really shaping that process from beginning to end, so that the research actually reflects their realities. Um, we have to value the knowledge, the very real knowledge and expertise of sanitation workers. They are the experts. So I wouldn't call myself an expert. I think actually many of the workers in our networks are the real experts. Um, I also think that with combating this invisibility within data, within political discourse, um, the next step is putting data in the hands of workers so that they can use it to project their voices, make something that's accessible, make something that's powerful that they can use to open up political spaces for themselves so that they can then, have this political space to really visibilize their realities, right? That's an important part of trying to integrate their perspectives into these sanitation systems. And just very, very quickly, just um, beyond all of that, these are sort of the key things that we need for in order to see um, improvements in terms of health, well-being, dignity for sanitation workers. So we need workers to organize. We need workers to be um, to be strongly involved in research processes. We need them to have that political space in order to progressively formalize them, so that they can work towards having those social protections and worker protections that protect their livelihoods and their health and their communities. And also it strengthens their demands beyond just formalization. So we know, for example, that sanitation workers and many other workers speak so much about needing to have strengthened public services. It's one thing to be delivering a public service. It's another to not have um, um, good enough access to wider public services that also engender dignity, for example, health and transport and sanitation and things like that. So when we have those sort of participatory processes, we are also supporting workers to make those arguments that challenge these issues, and so that they can fight for better public services, challenge things like privatization and austerity, and support for more public funding for these systems, including sanitation systems themselves. So I would say that that's very evident from our work at WeGo, that these are the core sort of things in terms of participation that are actually supporting workers to in making their demands for formalization, for strengthened public services, and all that means for workers' health and dignity.
Thank you so much. I'm going to run until the end of the hour, so you've got 9 minutes left. I'd really like to come to Francis next. And sorry, Francis, we are slightly behind schedule, so I'm so sorry to ask you to be a bit more concise in your answer than you would have otherwise. But could you tell us some highlights on what innovations or service models are most promising for improving worker safety and operational resilience? And then just to give Asif from Centre for Law and Justice a heads up, if you're comfortable, we'd love to hear from you as well. And please, any other participants, if you'd like to share a couple of minutes from your perspectives as well, we'd really like to open this up and have some more perspectives. So give me a kind of shout in the chat if you'd like to also come off mute. And then we have got a couple of questions. So if we could each be a couple of minutes for you, Francis, and then a couple for Asif, just so we can get to questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I will summarize my contribution here in a few minutes. Yeah. So on this theme, I want to focus on the second product that we have. This is the container-based solution. We own the value chain of this product, right from providing the facility, collecting, and what happens to the waste that we collect. So in this space, we have two major frontline sanitation workers. One is the collector, and the second one is the customer engagement person. So since we own this value chain, we've set up these frontline workers for success right from the onset. This is through training on safety, providing them with PPEs, speaking to them on how to engage these customers, because we already know how they perceive the sanitation workers. And we've also done quite some work on the system itself. So we have the person building the toilet, we have a specialized person for collecting, we have a specialized person for consolidating and transporting. So in a way, these workers work as if how any other person would work in a factory. So you get in with your home clothes, change into the PPEs and work clothes, do your work, take a shower, put in your home clothes, and walk home. So if you were to meet your friend out there coming from a factory, you're also in the same space with that person. So this has increased the acceptance of this team in the community. we've not done 100% of what we would want to do. So we also now improving. We've provided them with washing machines for the bag liners that we use, and also mechanized way of carrying this waste. Yeah. So in a brief way, that's how our frontline sanitation workers in this space look like.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate that very concise answer. Asif, if you're able and comfortable to tell us your perspectives, we'd love to hear them now. And Basaratin, if you could make sure that they're able to unmute.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Center for Law and Justice was founded back in 2011, and we started work on generally on religious minorities. And it happens to us that we realize that most of sanitation workers, they come from marginalized religious communities, Christians and Dalit Hindus. And in 2017, our executive director, Mary James Gill, she started a campaign, Sweepers Are Superheroes. And that was the first time because, as Rowan has very well explained, how people are in this work are stigmatized, and especially in India, they are seen from coming from Dalit untouchable background. So our campaign gave them a face. Before that, there was no picture, no one recognized that they worked, and even their deaths in sewers while cleaning sewers was never reported. So, and Andres has been very kind. He has been very supportive, and throughout the process, when we were developing our campaign and overall when we were reaching out to people, and so what the campaign did that in Pakistan it was comparatively easier. Society at the first level, they started realizing that sanitation workers are important for sanitation, and then at the state level or the government level, government started to recognize that they are important. For example, institutions sent out uh, notification that no one should be called by abusive terms, or and then there was one more thing that some of their provision of equipment comparatively improved. Their uniforms were given, and but these were very small things. At the same time, workers also realized that they are important, and they started taking, if not pride, at least not feeling less feeling shame that they are doing a bad job. And at the same time, Center for Law and Justice also worked with the children of sanitation workers. We wanted them to take pride in the work of their parents. So, and also, as Anders said, we started a annual recognition of sanitation workers on the 10th of December, so that they could be given awards for the lifelong work or the decades of their work they have done for the service of communities and people around them and making our environment clean. So, in a nutshell, we were able to make the society realize they were important. We were able to realize the government to provide them at least some benefits, and also made the workers help improve their dignity. Thank you. If there be any question, I'd be very happy to explain.
I think that's a beautiful example. Thank you so much for sharing. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, and we've got some complicated questions. Perhaps I can get, and maybe I can ask for some very top line answers. I also was wondering if we would be able to maybe take some of this conversation onto LinkedIn if we can have some conversation back and forth there as well. But if I can ask my fellow panelists, and this is for whoever of you wants to answer, I think we'll only have time for one question. So the question is, sanitation workers often come from marginalized communities, with many facing extreme poverty, unstable housing, and in some cases, substance use challenges. Based on your experiences, what approaches have been shown to effectively improve their well-being given these factors? Rowan, from a behavioral perspective, do you have a
Yeah,
perspective?
sure. Yeah, so I think there's obviously a multitude of factors that are driving vulnerability for any particular person or any particular sanitation worker. So I think good programming starts with understanding that nuance, that kind of segmentation of the kind of people you're trying to reach and the different services that they need. Naturally, if people have substance abuse issues, right, that requires a specific response, maybe low barrier access to health services and substance use support, things that are non-punitive, simple, keep access confidential. These are the sort of things that we spend a lot of time on as health behavior researchers. But I think a number of the panelists here have talked about different methods to promote dignity for sanitation workers who are facing these things. And it's a complicated question and it has complicated answers. And whether it's, I think every panelist here has spoken about the need for interventions that address multiple vulnerabilities almost simultaneously. But I'd say maybe there's like a need to build some stability. So you can do some prioritization of which of these things need to be particularly addressed, and prioritize those intervention areas. I think that the question is, depending on the type of person that you're supporting, the context that they're working in, which of those have more priority and which of those are easier to implement given the different contexts, or like the existing supporting infrastructure. So integration with CSOs and these sorts of things. And I did like Christy's comment, like these things need to be participatory, they need to be ground up, they cannot be top down. And so I think that that same logic applies here in response to your question. There's not a one size fits all. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point to end on. So to thank you to all of you who have joined us today, for giving us your time and learning more about this topic together with us. If you'd like to learn more about the specific project that Basara have worked on through Transform, there is a link in the chat. And we will circulate the recording for this webinar to you by email. As I mentioned, I will post, I'll work with the Basara team to post the questions that we've received and I'll tag in the panelists and ask for their responses. And we'd really love for this to be more conversation. I think there are so many diverse perspectives on this, and that is a positive thing. So if you also, of course, have perspectives, please do contribute those as well. Yeah, once again, thank you for all your time and engagement, and we'll close the webinar here. Thank you.